Hi everybody, Steve Farmer here, and I have finally put in all the games for the 2012 Pueblo. In our first video here, we're going to look at two games that Ken Larsen played in. Now, I believe he played in a 2-day event, which means his first two games were played at a game in 90 pace. By the way, I'm going to really make my videos of this tournament rather brief for a couple of reasons. One, the U.S. Chess League is about to start up in another 15 days or so here. Two, my girlfriend doesn't understand why I spend so much time talking to you guys. And three, the Southern Arizona Chess Association held a new election at the Pueblo, and Troy Oberg was elected president. And it's a shame to lose Kiki and Karen. They were a powerhouse for Saka for so many years. But it's time for people to get involved in local chess and help Saka become a force to be reckoned with. It had slipped down from a very powerful organization many years ago, well before Kiki and Karen. And those guys managed to keep it alive and actually thriving pretty well. But it could be better, and it's going to take help. But Kiki and Karen never got the help they needed. So this is a plea, if you're an Arizona player, a Southern Arizona player, to help us out, get involved. And you can send me an email at stupidbishop@gmail.com. That's stupid, S-T-O-O-P-I-D. So, several reasons why I'm going to make the videos of this tournament rather brief. Okay, as I mentioned, the first game we're going to look at is Ken Larsen playing black here, and Matt Noble is playing white. And keep in mind, it's a fast time control. And Ken throws out his center counter, or the Scandinavian. And not much explanations needed on these opening moves. It's pretty standard. And now here, Matt castles queenside. Usually you see kingside castling. But okay, he castles. Knight to d5, bishop to g5, h6, bishop to h4. Ken takes the knight on f3, and then takes the knight on c3. And now here's a bit of a crossroads for Matt. Well, first of all, we can see the queen takes c3 is not good because the queen f4 check. After the king moves or the queen blocks, we pick up the bishop. Not good. Bishop to g3 hitting the queen doesn't work because of knight a2 check. King comes over to attack the knight, but queen to b4 now. And after king takes a2, black has just managed to win a pawn. But the move played in the game, b takes c3, is not very impressive either. Now, knight to b6, and now bishop e2 is played, and this is a horrible mistake. And it's unfortunate because you're playing these games at a fast pace, trying to get through the opening on as much memory as you can. And I don't know about you, but at 9 o'clock in the morning, I have no memory whatsoever. Not even of the night before. Well, actually, it's usually not of the night before. Let's step back. King to b1 had to be played here. And this is still not all that attractive after knight to a4. King a1, queen a3, threatens mate, but he can play rook to b1. Knight takes c3, winning a pawn. Rook to b2, now bishop to d6. Black is a pawn up. He's got a solid pawn structure. He's going to castle. He's going to have a good game. This is exactly what Ken plays for. He loves these kind of positions where he's a pawn up, he can grind the opponent down for an eternity. But back in our game, bishop to e2 was played. But the problem with this is queen to a3 check, and now king to b1. And we can see that knight to a4 now threatens mate. And after queen to c1, Ken plays knight to c3. And Matt resigned because he's going to get mated as early as move 17. A very catastrophic start for Matt in this tournament. But surprisingly, he went on to tie for second place. Now, I've done this myself. I've started out tournaments with a loss. And I've even won 3 tournaments after starting out with a loss. Well, tie for first with 2 tournaments, won outright. The one I won outright was lost the first one, won the next 7. And that was the European Chess District Championship. I think it was 79. But it can happen. So never falter even if you lose the first round. it's worth it to play on and try and score as best you can in the tournament. And in this case, Matt went on to tie for second, I believe. Okay, let's move on to our next game. And here we have Ken Larsen playing white this time, and he's playing Kingsleigh Wong. Ken opens up with d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, e3, castles, knight ge2, rook e8, a3, bishop f8, e4, d6, g3, c5, bishop to g2. Now c takes d4, knight takes d4, a6. Let's go back for a moment. It might be worth it for black to try d5. I mean, after all, this is the main goal of black in these types of positions. And after e5, now if he goes knight to e4 here, we take, and if we take on e4, queen to a5, check, it's going to pick up the pawn on e5. So castles, knight to t7, and queen to c2. I think white has a slight pull in this position, not much of an advantage. Or, after e5, knight to d7 instead, then cd5. And now, if e takes d5, I think after f4, white's got a slight edge. And after knight takes e5, de6, again, white has a slight edge. Nothing much, but a little edge. Kingsleigh played a6, castles, queen c7. Nah, a6 wasn't a bad move. b3, knight c6, bishop to e3, all normal developing moves. Bishop d7, I think black's probably equalized here. h3, rook ad8, queen d2, knight to e7, rook ac1, bishop c6. Now Ken is sharp enough to spot the best move here. If you'd like to pause the video, what would you play here if you were playing white? Keep in mind you're the higher rated opponent. You're about 300 points higher than your opponent. Do you play it safe? Do you go for sharp tactics? Okay. I hope you paused the video and took a look at this. Ken, regardless of who he's playing, he's going to play sharp. He played knight to d5 here. And this is pretty easy to see what the point is behind this. If e takes d5, which was not played in the game, c takes d5, and that bishop on c6 is pinned. So we get this. It takes c6, b takes c6, and now bishop c5. And white has a comfortable game, a slight advantage for white. And he's got the bishop pair, and in the hands of an experienced veteran like Ken Larsen, it's probably close to winning. Going back to our game, after knight d5, Kingsleigh decided to just drop the queen back, and after knight takes f6, gf6, rook fe1, king h8, and now b4 was played. Let's take a step back here for a moment. I think knight c6 is probably a little better, a little more accurate. And after knight takes, bishop comes to b6, rook to c8, and now f4. And white's gaining more space, and he's controlling the d8 square, which is actually a pretty critical point because black can't get his rook onto d8 and then throw in the move d5, the freeing move that he would need in this position. Ken played b4, and I think that Kingsleigh messed up here. He plays e5. Let's step back for a moment. I think bishop to d7 was a little bit better. After knight to e2, knight to g6, bishop to b6, rook c8, and again f4. And again, I think white has the better position here. A little more favorable for white than maybe in the previous line. But back in our game, after b4 was played, he played e5. And again, I think Ken should take on c6. He plays knight to e2, but let's take a look at knight takes c6. Now, if he tries knight takes c6, we have b5 in reserve here. And after knight to e7, ba6, ba6, and rook to b1, hitting the queen. She moves out of the way, and queen to d3. White's very solid here. He's got weakened pawns, but he's got very active pieces. I think white's clearly better in this position. So in this variation, if he takes with the pawn instead of the knight, then we got rook e to d1, c5, rook to b1 here, queen to c8, and b5. And I think white is much better here as well. He may be close to winning in these lines. Back in our game, after e5 was played, Ken dropped the knight back to e2, bishop to g7, knight to c3, rook to g8. Yeah, it's the right idea, I think, to try and create some counterplay on the king side. b5, because he's losing it on the queen side. Pawn takes, and bishop to d7, rook e d1, bishop to e6, bishop to b6, rook to d7, and now I think knight to d5 should be played, but Ken played queen to e2, f5, and now queen to h5. Let's take one quick step back here. I think e takes f5 is a little better, and then after bishop takes, now you play a4. I think white is just clearly better here, very solid, and he's got some possibilities to create a pass pawn on the queen side. In our game, f5 was played, and Ken answered with queen to h5. Now f4, sharp move by Kingsleigh. He has got to be aggressive. He's getting crushed on the queen side if he doesn't do anything aggressive. Ken plays knight to d5, and now bishop takes, pawn takes. Now I think black should play f5 here. He did not. He played knight to g6. Let's take a look at f5. I think this gives black some good counterplay here. It's very double-edged, this position, but I think this was the way to go. After g takes f4, e takes f4. It's pretty much got to slide the king out of danger. So king h1, queen to a8, queen to f7, hoping for queen takes a3. Because now we have queen to e6, and that rook is all of a sudden stuck there on d7. Can't go anywhere. But instead of queen takes a3, go queen to a4. And now, if queen to e6, black can just take on b5. So rook to e1. Now f3 is an important move. The knight on e7 is hit, for sure. Now, do you just run away? No, because how are you going to protect that knight? If you move it, the rook on d7 falls. So f3 is a must. And now bishop f1 has to be played. Going back, if you take on f3, then black plays queen to f4, hitting the bishop. And after the bishop goes back, guess what? Bishop to e5, and black is the one that's winning this game. So, going back to where black played f3, white has to play bishop f1. After bishop e5, white has to sack for that. He cannot allow queen to f4. Pawn takes, queen to e6 hits that rook. And again, the rook has really nowhere to go. So queen to h4, queen takes e5 check, rook to g7, and now bishop to d4, and knight to g8. And here I believe that white is winning this. However, this was such a complicated line after f5. You know, you're in a hot spot as black. You know, white's really getting ready to start penetrating on you. So you got to do something, and I think f5 was a more active way to go. All right, knight to g6 is played, and now bishop to e4, queen to a8. Now I think Ken should have played queen to f5. He played bishop f5. A logical looking move. Again, it's based on that rook really not having any place to go. I mean, he can go to e7, which is what was played in the game. But let's take a look at queen f5. Why is this different? Well, here, after rook to e7, we can throw in rook to e3, queen to a4, rook to b1, protect that pawn, rook g to e8. And I think that white has got a nice, solid position, and he can slowly plan his attack at his leisure. He's got everything bottled up and protected. No rush for white. Comfortable position. In the game, bishop f5 was played. Now rook to e7, of course. And bishop takes g6 was played. And this is probably a bit of an error. Things might actually be turning to black's favor after that. It's probably best to just play queen to f3, after queen to a4, queen to e4, reversing the positions on the queen and bishop. Queen takes a3, and I think we have a pretty level position here. But after rook to e7, Ken took on g6. Now f takes g6, queen to g5, rook to f7. Yeah, I think that black is doing just fine here. I think he's out of hot water for any attacks. Rook to d3, queen to a4, rook to b1, queen to e4, rook b to d1, queen to c4, and now Ken does slip up. He plays bishop to a5. Just giving up the b pawn for no reason. I thought he could play g takes f4, e takes f4, and queen to g4, but even here black is probably a bit better. But back in our game after queen to c4 and bishop to a5, I think black is clearly better after queen takes b5, bishop to b4, and now he should play e4. He plays queen to d7. Let's look at e4. I think this is the most dangerous line for white. If rook 3 to d2, then e3, f e3. Now black can flick in rook to f5, after queen to g4, f takes e3, so that the queen on g5 can't take that pawn. Queen to e2, hitting the queen on b5, queen moves away, rook gets out of the attack, now rook to e8, black is a pawn up, and that pawn is far advanced on e3, and things like rook to f2 look pretty dangerous for white. I think black is probably easy enough to say black is winning here. But this was also one of those fast time control games, and we're at move 39, and Kingsleigh plays queen to d7, and queen to g4, and black is still better here, but white's not at least getting it handed to him. F takes g3, and now I think that Ken should have played rook takes g3. He did not. He played queen takes g3, and as I mentioned, this was actually the game in 90, so there was no time to stop and smell the roses after time control. So rook gf8 was played, rook 3 to d2, bishop to h6, rook to c2, rook to f3, queen to g4, queen to a4, and rook d to d2. Alright, the score sheet stopped at this point, and I thought that the game was agreed to a draw at this point, which seemed ludicrous to me. Because after bishop takes d2, rook takes d2, h5, and the point of this is he can't take the pawn, because rook to g8, so queen to g5, now rook 8 to f6. And black's idea is very clear, crystal clear. Going to play queen to d7, overpower the h-pawn, infiltrate with either the queen or the rook. And I think black is winning here. But let's go back to this position here where rook d to d2 was played. I came to find out later on when Ed Yetman came to visit, he wondered how this game turned out, and we took a look at it, and he goes, no, this wasn't the final position. They were in a time scramble, and they continued on. So several moves were played before the draw was agreed. The problem in this position for white is that black is solid, very solid, and white's got weak pawns all over the board. Okay, this might have been anticlimactic to end on this game for this first video, but I just wanted to show you that the difference in the level of play from the game in 90 to the regular tournament time controls is vast. I'm sure that if Ken had more time, he would have found the correct moves. And conversely, had Kingsleigh had more time, he probably would have won this ending following this little pattern here. Bring the queen around to attack h3. I don't know how the game continued after this, but a draw was the eventual result. So, Credit Kingsleigh for holding Ken to a draw. Kingsleigh's rated 1978. Ken's rated 2315. So, good job to draw. Alright, that's it for this video. I'll be bringing more as soon as I can. Until next time, good luck.